President Trump is holding a rally tonight in Minnesota, a state that he lost and is hoping to win because he lost it narrowly and wants to win it this time around. And there are some interesting dynamics around Minnesota specifically that I want to get to. But first I want to talk about what are some of the big things that that's going to be dominating our media just generally over the next year. I typically don't like to do here's what's going to happen stuff. I think that predicting what's going to happen is a terrible road to go down, but these I think feel pretty safe. One is the impeachment inquiry. That's going to be eating up a lot of media time and focus, and similarly for the White House. And the other, of course, is the 2020 campaign, right? So there are a lot of things going on that are drawing the president's attention. And that's why the economy is going to be a big weakness for Trump. And I want to talk about a little bit about why that is. But first, I want to share some things from the Ben White Politico article that prompted this line of thought for me. So the point behind this article today is that manufacturing is in recession, right? In the United States, the manufacturing sector is basically understood right now by economists and people who study these things by the quantitative metrics they use to be in recession. There are certain metrics that they use, and when you apply them just to the manufacturing sector, it appears we're in a recession. But here's why this is a weakness for Trump. And I realize it seems obvious why that would be a weakness for Trump, but I want to talk a little bit about what I think is really going on here. Trump routinely talks about how great the economy is doing. He talks about the stock market constantly, but he also talks about the unemployment rate, which right now is around 3.5%, which is good. That's a really good employment rate. And we shouldn't begrudge the goodness of that just because you may not like Trump. It is a good thing for real people that there are jobs available, that they have jobs. Here's a line from the story though that I want to make, that I want to bring up, which is in relation to all of this job creation, quoting Ben White now, he says, dig deeper and large numbers of the jobs are coming from uncontested states like California. In other words, where actual people are seeing the beneficial effects of this is in states that we already know how they're going to vote one way or the other. California is not going to be re-electing Donald Trump. So if you have an economic environment in California that's relatively positive, that actually doesn't help Trump. When you look at the states that Trump cares about, not the red states, but the states that he either won before and or has a good chance of winning again, according to data, this is quoting now again from Politico, according to data from Moody's and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the federal agency, manufacturing shed jobs between last October and now in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and North Carolina, and Michigan was flat. And by the way, that's before the GM strike hit Michigan. So manufacturing is actually going down in those states. And then now we'll talk about Minnesota. A lot of the farm states, farming has gotten some attention for its economic problems, a lot of which, as with the tariffs, as with manufacturing, is tied to the tariffs. In Minnesota in particular, most of the states where farming is an issue, those are already Trump states. And a lot of they're getting billions of dollars in bailouts anyway, but even if they weren't, they're not likely to vote Democratic. Minnesota, on the other hand, relies heavily on manufacturing and farming. And so there are other details there, and I'll link to the article because I think it's worth looking at. But the points I want to make about why it matters is that a lot of this stuff is at county level or state level. In other words, overall, national economic numbers are looking pretty good. All the needles are in the right register for most of the metrics that not just Trump, but the political press look at. So here's why this is a weakness for Trump. The weaknesses in the economy are in these discrete pockets. Some purple states, some counties in purple states. The Politico piece talks about Racine, Wisconsin, and the troubles they're having. And the reason that is a weakness is because Trump is not good at focusing on things that other people aren't telling him to focus on. So if you don't have the national political press talking about manufacturing being in distress, talking about the weak state of farming in specific states, in specific counties that he needs to win, he doesn't gin up a narrative against it. He doesn't create a scapegoat for it. He doesn't create an excuse for it. He doesn't give the people specifically affected by it a narrative in which he's still their savior. And so as long as impeachment and the 2020 campaign, and for all we know, the massacre of Kurds in northern Syria, as long as those three things, along with the mainstream media's long-standing disinterest in ground level economic factors, and I don't mean Politico, which obviously did an article here, I'm talking about the cable news cycles that drive the president's attention. As long as all of those factors continue to be in play, Trump's never going to respond to them, and that's why it's going to be a weakness, because he won't be in a position to reclaim those people. He doesn't even understand that he's lost. And now I'm going to check and see if YouTube is showing my video yet, which will mean I can actually see what you folks have been saying. And if not, I have no idea what I'm going to do. Hey, there I am. Okay, so we're going to look at the chat box. And Leonardo Alvarez says, hey, what's up? We are, apparently. DLJ says evening. James Harris, we get an oi oi. Jessica, hello everyone. James Harris says you're awesome. I'm going to assume he's talking to Jessica. Let's keep it clean, folks. Joseph Murphy says good morning. James Harris gives me a sound check. Thank you, sir. Leonardo Alvarez says, who here saw the Laker versus Nets game in China live? Not a sports guy. Didn't see it. James Harris says, hold up, Giuliani was arrested? No, he was not arrested. Although I read a fascinating column this morning that said the House Sergeant of Arms could and should arrest him. No, this is two of his, I think, associates at his law firm or something like that. I don't even know the connection. They've been charged with campaign finance violations. Joseph Murphy says one should never have faith in YouTube. David Brasher says Giuliani wasn't arrested. Some of his staff were. I don't know if they were directly staff, but David, you might be up on the story more than I am. Leonardo Alvarez says, why is the stock market the measurement for economy doing well? So the honest answer to that, Leonardo, would be, I don't know, because you would have to ask each and every person who uses that. But historically, there was some correlation between how the stock market was doing and how the people who worked for the companies that are part of those markets were doing. And that's because the companies in the American economy, those companies weren't quite as extractive as they had been and as they are now. So you had strong labor unions, which meant that people who worked for companies whose stock was rising, they were participating in that success. And you also had high marginal tax rates, which disincentivized all the crazy stuff that leads companies to do short-term extractive strategies rather than long-term stuff that actually builds the company's wealth, as opposed to building short-term stock wealth, which then boosts their bonuses and only benefits people who own stock, not people who work for the companies that are in the stock markets. William Martyr says, hey, good morning, everyone. What's the topic and how are we going to connect the dots to the Jesuits today? You know, I ask myself that every morning. How does this connect to the Jesuits? Clayton Shake says, thank you for all your hard work. Always ready to tune in. Clayton, I don't think I've seen you here before. The name doesn't strike me as familiar. If you have weighed in and I missed it, I apologize, but welcome. I hope you're subscribing. If you're a new subscriber, welcome, and thank you for being here and thanking me for my hard work. Peter Zelenkov says, good morning all. DLJ says, that was some deep psychoanalysis on Trump. Do you think that Pelosi et al. Might have realized this? So I didn't mean to present that. Thank you, DLJ. That's nice of you to say. I didn't mean to present that as psychoanalysis. I just think what we've seen from him is that he is reactionary, not in the political sense, but just in the sense that that he responds to what he perceives in the world that he pays attention to. In other words, he doesn't make active efforts to go out and determine empirically what is going on here and what can we do about it. He hears what's being said on Fox or CNN and he says, well, that pisses me off. I'm going to do something about that. And while he's being the anger puppet for, you know, all these various pundits, some of whom, you know, are former or future staffers of his own, that just means he's not focusing on the things that politically he should be. And I will say, to his credit, he does focus on manufacturing broadly, right? That was part of his shtick when he came into office. But I always felt that that was less a question of wanting to be involved and engaged in making life better for the people who had those jobs, than it was just sort of this romantic, nostalgic attachment, maybe a xenophobic attachment, maybe a classist attachment to the sort of image of, you know, Americans driving steel or laying track or mining coal or whatever it might be. And there's, yeah, okay, so here's exactly what I'm talking about. All the manufacturing soft spots that I just talked about, right? They're isolated, they're pockets. Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, was on CNBC recently and was asked about these recent weak manufacturing numbers. Here's what he said according to the Politico piece. Quote, manufacturing is strong as a rock. I should say that's A space R-O-C-K, not strong as Iraq. And that's a weakness for Trump. If his own trade advisor is saying manufacturing is great, then he's not going to pay attention to it. He's not going to do anything about it. He's not going to change it, which I should point out, that's bad in the sense that those are real people who are losing manufacturing jobs in those states, and that matters. And it might be a good thing for Democrats politically and for the country long-term historically for Trump to lose because of that, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's real skin in the game from people who happen not to be us. So, but the point is that as long as they're able to float that narrative, he's happy because he wants the narrative more than he wants to do the work, potentially painful, potentially laborious, potentially unpleasant, of finding out what is the state of manufacturing and why is that. One factor I come back to all the time is that productivity in, I believe it's coal mining, but it might be mining generally, is roughly tenfold higher now than it was back in 1971. And what that means is that if you wanted America to return to its coal mining employment numbers from 1971, you would need to be producing 10 times as much just to get the same numbers, because, as I said, productivity is 10 times. Automation means that now one person can produce as much coal as it took 10 people to do back in 1971. That's just fantastical, not fantastic, fantastical to imagine that we would ever get back to that. And by the way, it's a horrible job. It's a horrible job. We should be looking to eliminate that job regardless of how the economy is doing. We should be doing everything we can not to ask people to risk their lives going down into holes and breathing poison and possibly getting crushed to death, right? That seems like a pretty non-controversial thing to say. Let's not have that be a thing that we do anymore. It doesn't mean we abandon those people. It means we spend just as much effort protecting and saving them once they're out of the hole as we do in getting them out of that hole in the first place. It doesn't mean we have this infantile notion about danger where, oh, as long as the danger is not immediate, we'll save you from it. But if it's long-term starvation or the economic degradation of your family, then screw you. Let's see what else we've got here. Ooh, Leonardo says he works in manufacturing, so I want to get to that. Amanda K says, so it seems like from Emma from TYT has done some videos, I think, that the farmers have been leaving Trump. They are pissed. Small farmers are the most effective. So yeah, definitely TYT and others have been talking to some of these people, and it's tough to extrapolate from individual anecdotal stuff to know what the bigger picture looks like. But the point is that as far as Trump's concerned, the bigger picture is great. So he's also not doing the work of finding out whether these numbers mean anything to him politically. Let's see. Leonardo Alvarez says, I work in manufacturing medical equipment in Southern California. Oh, that's interesting. I actually was in San Diego a couple years ago looking at, I can't even believe I'm blanking on the name of the company now, but oh, I think it was Eli Lilly. Call me, Leonardo. And some of the stuff they're up to. Let me let you finish your thought. Says, so far the whole issue in manufacturing hasn't affected us. So Leonardo, I certainly defer to your expertise, but there are job issues in medical manufacturing. Now, I'm not sure, you say medical equipment, so that's slightly off of what I was talking about, although not entirely. I did a bunch of reporting on the medical equipment tax, right? And in looking at that, I learned a little bit about the pharmaceutical industry and the medical device manufacturers. Again, was it Stryker? I think Stryker was the name of the company I was looking at the time. And even medical manufacturing can be automated, but also the industry generally is changing in a way that does threaten jobs. And one of the phenomena that I looked at the time was that what they used to do, what companies used to do, was they would have sprawling suburban complexes, right, where they would do R&D and testing and manufacturing, right? That's an expensive model, and they're moving away from that. And I'll bet if you're in Southern California, you're aware of some of these. What instead you now have are these sort of third-party owned complexes where medical companies have a smaller presence, but they're next to their neighbors in these complexes are academia and small VC-funded startup firms that are usually pegged to like a single. They've usually pegged their hopes and ambitions on a single device or a single line of pharmaceuticals that they're hoping to develop. The point being that you now have the medical companies here essentially able to vampire off of taxpayer-funded and VC-funded research. And the payoff for the VC-funded stuff is that they get bought out by one of the big boys, and that's how the investors there get paid off. But this quarter of it is funded by you and me. And then the pharmaceuticals come in and they swoop up the successful stuff from academia, and they somehow end up walking off with the rights to it and the rights to make it exclusively and the rights to fend off patents and all of this stuff. So I'm glad that you, Leonardo, are safe and secure in the sector where you are, but the trends in the industry overall, I suspect, are moving towards just as toxically extractive a model as we've seen in retail and so many other things. You know, like I said, actually, the best way to reach me is probably at JT Larsen, JTLARSEN on Twitter. You can always DM me there. Amanda K says, for sure, we are just not hearing too much about the devastating effects on them, too much from the tariffs. That's responding to Jessica on Emma's agricultural reporting. Joseph Murphy says, Agricorps, meaning agricultural companies, are receiving the largesse of the bailouts. Smaller operators are in financial distress. This is refarming. Yep, of course. Jessica says, we've had over 1,600 small farms close. I don't remember, Jessica, did you say you were in Wisconsin where that is? I don't know. Let's see. Amanda K says, I live in Southern Oregon. It's pretty dry. They would have to invest in indoor if it's wet, I think, but I don't know for sure. But so you guys are doing the big work now of solving the actual problems. I'm just blathering on here about macro media, political strategy nonsense, and you guys are at the granular level. You are getting it done. This is kind of impressive / scary. Jessica confirms she's in Wisconsin. Clayton Shake says, sounds like my Oregon peeps might be in this thread. Our hemp farms can't find cheap labor. LOL, let's be real. Yeah, and the whole thing about cheap labor goes to the immigration thing, which is there used to be, and probably still is, dormant somewhere, entire sectors of the Republican Party that were like, oh, we like the cheap labor. We like the cheap labor. And not just cheap labor, meaning unskilled or uneducated undocumented workers, but also highly skilled, highly educated, low-paid workers, right? What is it, the H-1 visas, I think they're called? And before Trump was even in office, he was taking meetings with all these Silicon Valley companies saying, hey, don't remember, we need those exemptions on those visas, but otherwise, yeah, build a wall, give us our visas. Caranola says, hi, Jonathan, it's 12:49 a.m. Caranola, if I remember correctly, is in Tokyo and should be getting to sleep because we take care of ourselves. But hello, Caranola. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I missed because the line spacing. So let me finish Caranola's thought. It's 12:49 here in Tokyo. I'm on because a huge typhoon headed this way has canceled my jobs for tomorrow. Oh, so you get to pull an all-nighter, catching up on all the back issue TYTI dailies. Have you seen Bernie's recent message on his hospital experience? It's literally 2 tabs away on my computer. I just saw it right before going live with you guys, so it's on my to watch list. Clayton Shake says, you got it, homie. No one should build a business on cheap labor. So I'm not smart or informed enough to know whether that's true. Like maybe there are models where it does make sense for there to be sort of like entry-level cheap labor jobs, whether it's for teenagers or summer jobs or, you know, first jobs for unskilled labor. To me, the bigger issue is less the what the starting point looks like than how quickly you get to a sustainable, livable wage, you know, where appropriate. Obviously, no one should be working 40 hours a week. No grown-up should be working 40 hours a week and not be able to pay rent and their bills and for their education and or their kids' education, right? Let alone a vacation every once in a while and be able to plan for retirement. This used to be the norm. This used to be the norm in one-income families with 4 family members. You didn't need a college degree to be able to pull that off. So we definitely need to get back there. But I'm not entirely sure that there's no place for cheap labor. And I don't mean I'm kind of questioning it. I mean, I literally don't know. Let's see. Sorry, I'm backing up. Everyone's asking Caranola about, oh, sorry. DLJ is asking whether the typhoon is going to affect the rugby. I should have personally said before, you know, obviously I hope everyone there is safe and survives and comes through well if the typhoon hits land or affects people. Let's see. Patrick's Time says, still no evidence Trump committed any crime. I would disagree with that, and I think that it depends what you consider evidence, and it depends what you consider a crime. There are laws that say you're not allowed to ask foreign governments to help you in your campaign. There is some evidence. You might not agree that it's proof, but it's evidence, right? Let's be clear on what evidence means. Evidence doesn't mean, yeah, nailed it, it happened. Evidence just means some sign that it may have happened, some indication that we should take the possibility seriously. So it's one thing for you to say there's no evidence, there's no proof. You know, reasonable people can disagree about that. But it also might be that you don't know the law very well. And neither do I should add. I haven't looked into the laws regarding foreign, essentially in-kind donations to campaigns or the rules against soliciting them, but they're there. There is some, regimen around what you can and can't do. And he's asked for help against his political rivals on national, and by national, I mean global television. So if you're going to say there's no evidence, maybe you're being sloppy about what the word evidence means, or maybe you're just entirely tribalistic and nothing he could do. Like literally his boast that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. Maybe you agree with that. Maybe your allegiance to him is so strong that you will not see evidence anywhere. But I will say there is hope, I think, because it seems to matter to you whether there is evidence. And that's a good thing. But before you evaluate the evidence, you should probably think first about what counts to you as evidence, right? What counts to you as a crime? Do those things before you do the research into whether he's done it, but then stick by what you decide initially, right? That's a good way to ensure that we're not just blindly being tribalistic. If you decide beforehand that if he specifically said to Ukraine, I want you to investigate Joe Biden, and it turned out that they were exerting any kind of pressure, overt or otherwise, on Ukraine to do so, and you think that would be wrong, well then you have to stick by that if the evidence shows that that's the case, right? That's just basic empirical epistemological authenticity, right? Integrity. Leonardo Alvarez says, millionaire Republicans in Orange County, Southern California heavily rely on immigrant workforce. And they're certainly not the only ones, for sure. And that is definitely that availability of cheap labor, and not just cheap labor, right? When I worked on Alec Baldwin's show, one of our guests was Christina Sinsoon, who talked about the fact that undocumented labor doesn't just mean you can pay them cheaply, it means they have no recourse when you abuse and exploit them in any way, right? They can't go to the cops, they can't go to the Labor Department, especially these days. So it's not just that they can bake in, it's like when Ford with the Pinto, they were able to bake in what their legal liability, their legal exposure was, and make blowing up cars part of the business plan. And once you, and so now, since they can get away with it on cheap labor, they can build business plans around that. So it's certainly true that they're building business plans and have been around cheap labor, but also around abusable and exploitable labor. Jessica says the EPA is currently corrupt. There's a conversation going on about pesticides, I think, or other kind of bad toxic pollutants and things like that, poisons, environmental poisons. Until we get rid of the corruption, we will not get the leadership of this country to stop allowing companies to kill us for profit. So I'm not super well schooled on this, but when I did some reporting about a year ago on the Mount Air Corporation, this is a poultry company that's very big in Delaware. They're headquartered in Delaware. The CEO is a big bankroller of the National Prayer Breakfast and the secretive Christian group behind it. And he's also a big bankroller of Republicans, but not against Chris Coons, who is the senator from Delaware. And it also turns out that some of the people very closely associated with the Fellowship Foundation, aka the family, you might have seen the documentary on Netflix, they were basically putting people in charge at the EPA, people who were coming out of this heritage circle, which is very much tied, at least via the relationships of its leaders, to the National Fellowship Foundation. So yeah, it's not just corrupt, it's a case of maximalist regulatory capture, which of course we're seeing across a lot of cabinet agencies for the past 3 years. It's regulatory capture, meaning when a regulatory body becomes now an instrument not to regulate the industry, but to assist the industry. Regulatory capture tends to happen at sort of lower level, where people essentially just get co-opted or sucked in or sometimes paid off by the industries they're supposed to be regulating, and the top-down instinct is supposed to, or impulse is supposed to be, to guard against that. And by the way, I'm not intending to cast blanket aspersions on regulators. We're talking about an exception rather than the norm. It used to be such an exception that they had a name for it, regulatory capture. You could point to 1 out of 100 people, regulators, and say, look at this, they're working for the industry they're supposed to be regulating. But now, the people they literally hire people from the industry to run the regulatory agency. You guys know all this, so I'm not sure why I'm blathering on. This is not a particularly interesting insight. I apologize for wasting your time. Let's see. Oh, you guys are talking about rugby. Caranola says, bankrolling that frickin' family in the GOP. Sheesh. Sheesh being one of my favorite terms of derision. So sheesh right back at you. Patrick's Time says, DNC rejected all FBI requests to inspect the hacked server. No government has ever inspected the server. Okay. So here's what I would say, Patrick. If that matters to you, right? And it's okay that it matters to you, but then it's important to be equitable about that and decide, why does that matter to you? Is there a principle at stake? And then, if you want to maintain your integrity, then you have to apply that principle across the board to everyone, right? And look, the right often hammers people on the left for being silent during Obama's mistreatment of people, undocumented immigrants, and the way they were treated by the federal government. And that's valid, that's fair. But it's important to be able to do that in real time as well. So if you're not happy about the DNC's servers, then you should also not be happy about the multitudes of Trump officials who are using encrypted apps, personal email addresses, all of this stuff to be just as evasive. And by the way, I should point out, the DNC isn't even the government. You should be holding the government to a higher standard. So if you find that you're always agreeing with Republicans and you never say, you know what, that's messed up, and you find that everything the DNC or the Democrats do is wrong, that's a problem. And vice versa, by the way. It's a problem on the left as well. I'm not saying it's an equal problem. I tend to think it happens more on the right. But the way to combat it is to recognize that no one's always right, no one's always wrong. So if you're always agreeing with one party, then you're agreeing with them because it's the party. And that's not a good moral compass to have. Caranola says, yeah, Jonathan, didn't Obama deport more people of all presidents in US history? I wouldn't want to guess whether that's true, but that sounds familiar. Maybe someone can post a link to that or something. Let's see. Carlos, looks like I'm going to have to figure out how to block someone. That's not okay. We'll be taking care of that. I apologize, everyone. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. Patrick's Time confirms, yes, Obama deported a record number. All right. Oh, do I really have to stop this for a second to stop you, Carlos? That would be annoying. Let's see what we can do. Okay, Carlos is reported. I apologize, everyone, for the problems here. Let's see if we can do one more thing. All right. Can someone else put something in the chat box just so I can see whether or not it's still going, just Carlos free? Patrick's Time says, are you okay with Obama administration placing FBI spies? Oh, wait, we still have Carlos. Hold on. Let's try that instead. Okay. So I think your question is a little bit loaded there. When you say putting FBI spies, you're kind of putting your thumb on the scale in terms of how we think of these people. If there's a reason to think that they were put there in order for any purpose other than law enforcement, then yeah, I do have a problem with that. But the part of the problem in litigating this question is that the fact that someone belongs to the Democratic Party has become, in Republican eyes, proof of ill intent and bad faith. You've essentially just delegitimized, 35-40% of the American public because they have a different political leaning than yours. That's never been a standard in this country, and it's not an applicable one, right? That might be something you can point to as evidence for possible motive if they do wrongdoing, but there's been no indication of wrongdoing, right? You don't use a possible explainer for motive as prima facie proof that they actually did something. It's an after the fact explainer for why they might have. That's how that should work. So the idea that, let's see, Heather Vesper says, deleted is annoying, but take it as a compliment that you have your own set of trolls. Must be doing something right. What a horrific marker of some small measure of success. But I appreciate the sentiment, Heather. And look, I should say this. We've got one person in the chat box right now who's posting just gratuitously offensive stuff. But we've also had people who have disagreed with me and with most of you who, you know, are stating their opinions in what I take to be good faith efforts. And I tend to reject the sort of quarantining of human beings as trolls and just sort of delegitimizing wholesale anything they have to say as being of ill intent. And part of the reason for that is simply that I have relatives. I know people to whom I am close, familially and otherwise, who are going to vote for President Trump. And they're not, you know, they're not doing that to own me, you know. And so I think it's important that we grapple with why the real people who don't just want to watch the world burn, why they make the decisions they do. And so I don't trust my own ability to discern the difference there. And so I try to err on the side of admitting trolls, not quarantining them. In other words, it takes being sort of virulently morally obscene the way this one person is being right now to sort of make my antenna go up. Let's see what else you guys have. Patrick's Time says George Papadopoulos. By the way, I should say Patrick's Time, Patrick. I haven't seen you before, so I always like to give a shout out and a hello to newcomers. And I appreciate you engaging with someone who obviously is likely not politically on the same page with you. I think that's more important than shout out to yesterday, sitting down with former presidents. Says George Papadopoulos was flown to London by FBI informant Stephen Halper, where GP was informed Russia had HRC emails. Okay, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with that, but you know, here's the other thing I would say about Trump fans' pushback against the FBI. If you think the use of informants, if you think potential entrapment, if you think all of these law enforcement tools, that's my cat pushing the camera, if you think all of these law enforcement tools are illegitimate, then fight against them broadly, right? Don't say, hey, that technique is not fair, so therefore Trump should be off the hook. Say, we need to eliminate that, right? And look, you'll find a lot of partners on the left who will agree with you that the FBI and federal law enforcement have too much power. You're not going to get an argument necessarily from someone just because they're on the left about that. But if your argument is only, and that shouldn't be done to Trump, or it's wrong because it's being done to Trump, then you lose. Then you're essentially saying that it is tribal, that you have no problem with that when it's applied to fill in the blank here, right? Who does that kind of stuff typically get applied to? It's not presidents. So if you think it's an illegitimate law enforcement tactic or resource, then oppose it. Don't save your opprobrium, don't save your opposition for only when it's used against the one rich, powerful guy that you happen to like. Leonardo Alvarez says, why does CNN or NBC still invite people knowing that they will lie about Trump, yet they still invite them? So it's hard to answer that without knowing the specifics. Who's the anchor, who's the producer, who's the talent? But part of it is because they're not necessarily seen as liars. And also, they're not necessarily lying to the producers, right? The irony here is, if you lie to the producers or the talent, then you probably won't get booked back. And it'll be on something ridiculous like if you don't show up for a hit, right? You're booked for a live hit and you don't show up, and you say, yeah, the car never showed up, and then it turns out you did a live hit on the Today Show instead, you'll never be back. You will never be back on that show. Whoever the producer is on that show, they will never book you again. But if you lie on TV and say something that's BS about Joe Biden, and it's good TV, that's the filter that's being applied there. And the other thing I will say is, that's not necessarily just being selfish about your motives. That's about being able to recognize a lie, right? And it's easy to recognize the lie of, they said they missed the car, they said the car never showed up, but they were on the Today Show. That's an easy lie to recognize. To recognize that it's a lie about Biden means you're not involved in it personally anymore, so you don't necessarily know that it's crystal clear that the prosecutor was universally in the West decried for corruption, that the investigation was already dead and wasn't a threat. These are much less tangible, immediate things for a producer to be able to know. So all those factors basically mean that it's relatively easy to lie, and because you get good TV, by which I mean TV that doesn't actually tend to win, but feels exciting in the moment, that's why you get invited back. Never mind the fact that that kind of TV doesn't actually tend to win in the ratings. That when you have an argument on TV, you can explain to your boss, well, look, they had a really good back and forth there, and you've got an excuse for why you did it. And that's the important thing, not necessarily winning, but being able to explain why you didn't win. But also, here's the other reason. We keep paying attention to it, right? We keep incentivizing it. We keep talking about it. We keep taking the clips and putting it on. If you think something's, this is the kind of trap, and I mean that in a real way, I'm not being ironic, that we face in our politics and our media. It's the line between calling something out for being bad and ignoring it, right? And calling something out for being bad, you hope that has a disincentivizing effect. But the reality is that ignoring it actually has a disincentivizing effect, but that makes you feel complicit. And so people feel like they are being negligent if they don't call it out. But that's the real weapon, is to not call it out. Better yet, go find what their competitors did, and if it was good, call that out for being good, right? You really want to hurt a show that keeps booking liars? Ignore them and go help their competition, if their competition is better, right? That'll actually help them. If you've got any sway at all on social media, ignore them, right? That's the worst thing you can do to them. And it feels hard to ignore them, right? I'm seeing a bad thing on the internet, I must respond. Fight that impulse. That impulse is the biggest reason. In other words, it's our fault more than theirs. Wow, you guys have gotten deep into some other stuff here. Let's see. Let's see, why did Fusion GPS? I don't know. Honestly, Patrick, I don't know. Fly on the wall, I don't know what you guys are talking about, I'm sorry. Greg Scienski's cleaning lady says, oh, I should stop talking about things you don't like? Censorship? No, I'm talking about how to achieve a desired effect. If you want to make the thing that you don't like go away, the best way to do it is to not talk about it. That's not censorship, that's advice. Censorship is when I forcibly do it to you, especially if I'm a government. I'm not forcibly doing it, and I'm not a government. RA says hi. I agree. I concur. RA, hi back. Let's see. Black Betty says, Trump weakness is his strength, is his enemy, is his friend, is his mind, is his brain. I don't know what just happened, but that, like, wow. I'm going to read that again just because it's fun and because William S. Burroughs is gone, so someone's got to carry on. Trump weakness is his strength, is his enemy, is his friend, is his mind, is his brain. Let's see. Okay, you guys are talking about autism, so I'm a little bit lost. Patrick's Time says, you seem to have no problem with HRC campaign hiring foreign spy to get dirt from unnamed Russian sources. So I don't remember enough about the Steele dossier to know exactly how that went down, but here's what I would say. If you have a problem with that, then you should probably also have a problem with Ukraine, right? I haven't personally come to a position on whether the fact that Steele was first hired by Republicans or whatever, and the rule isn't that you're not allowed to hire foreign people. The rule is about getting what amounts to gifts from foreigners to your campaign. There's no rule that says you can't hire someone who was born in another country to work for your campaign. So I think it's important not to let xenophobia affect how we think about Russia. I think how we think about Ukraine. I think how we think about any of this stuff. General Lee says, Dixieland is Trump land. The South will rise again. Well, what do you mean again? When did it ever rise? Let's see. All right, I feel like we've kind of gotten off the rails a little bit here. William Marta says, good alternative media gives us actual dirt on our leadership and our so-called Democratic candidates, and mainstream media Jesuit drink controlled opposition that portrays them as our saviors. Let's see. Sherry Addis says, your trolls are out of control. I know, it's something's going on today. You know what I think happened? I think people are still pissed about the Joker commentary that I did the other day. Leonardo Alvarez says, I think the presidential position has too much power. People treat the office like a king or queen. What's your opinion? So I actually thought pretty early on, thank you for sharing that, Leonardo. I actually thought pretty early on that a positive outcome of Trump's presidency might be a depowering of the executive branch. I definitely think that we have a lot of people running around referring to them as constitutional originalists who are very happy to ascribe to the president powers that the Constitution ascribed to the legislature. So I definitely agree with you that there's too much power in the executive, and that's been true for Democrats as well. They might not have been as eager or quick to use that degree of executive power, but they haven't exactly abdicated it either. I do think Obama, he gets a lot of heat, and I'm not saying wrongly, for his reliance on executive orders, as well as a number of other things that were, borderline authoritarian. But I do think he also, as a constitutional law scholar, if I remember correctly, he had some appreciation for and interest in incentivizing a more active Congress. Sorry guys for all the Carlos stuff. Let's see. Oh gosh, I've been going almost an hour now. All right, in that case, I didn't realize I'd been going on so long. And I thought I didn't have a lot to talk about today, but you guys have had some really interesting stuff to say. Interesting in both the good and the bad sense. Clayton Shake says, that many subs, yeah, that's an operative. This is probably the most interactive live chat I've seen in a group. So in turn, bury the troll in our conversation. Yeah, that's probably a good, Jessica says, they're like mosquitoes. Caranola agrees with Leonardo and with me, more importantly, with me, right? This is what it's all about here. I'm kidding, Leonardo. Says, yeah, Leonardo, this is Caranola, way too much power in the executive, more checks and balances needed. But remember, Theodore Roosevelt was still the POTUS with the most executive orders. I'll take you at face value with that, Caranola. Thank you for that historical tidbit, since we couldn't have Kevin Cruz here today. And here's one thing I'll say about more checks and balances needed, is that it's become popular, especially on the left, in the Democratic Party, to be all aflutter about checks and balances in action, right? There's been a lot of hand-wringing about, oh no, Bernie and Warren might fight. They're supposed to fight, right? I saw an article, I confess I didn't read it, but I saw an article that last week, maybe earlier this week, that basically said that the fact that the fact that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are both in the fight is actually helping both of them. And part of it is that it's helping to legitimize the sort of broad ideological space that they're in. It's moving other candidates towards them, and it's also kind of preventing Biden from taking out one of them, right? Because in theory, if you take out one, then the remaining one, Star Wars reference, if you kill me, I become that much stronger. So checks and balances, the way they play out, are often intuitively uncomfortable. Oh no, mommy and daddy are fighting. But if we stop seeing them as mommy and daddy, and we start seeing the system as inherently built to be adversarial in the ideas at play, in the interests at stake, then we can embrace this. And by the way, if we embrace it, then it doesn't have to be personal, because then you're not doing something wrong by being a check and or balance. You're being part of the system. And so you're not necessarily treated as the enemy, you're treated as the opposing stakeholder doing what the opposing stakeholder is supposed to do. So I think that was Caranola who said, hooray, checks and balances. And at the risk of not being a check and balance on Caranola, I would say, I agree with you, more checks and balances. Let's see, what have we got here? Patrick's Time says, in other words, CrowdStrike, upon which, so I'm gonna stop getting into the weeds with you, Patrick, just because I try not to do that on stuff that I haven't covered. And it's not that it's not important, it's just that there were a lot of people on that story, and I don't think I was even at TYT when all that stuff was playing out. So I'm just not sufficiently well read in. My point on that is going to be, if those kinds of corruption bother you, and you're not bothered by any in the Republican Party currently, that should be that's a red flag for you. Like, and I'll give an example of me trying to do right by exactly this kind of principle. I've talked before today, so this is not something I'm inventing on the spot. I've talked before today about the fact that Biden is kind of in a jam, because he can either say, which I don't think would be true, yeah, okay, there was some corrupt stuff going on there, or he can say, there was nothing corrupt going on there, everything was above board, this is how things are supposed to work, which draws attention to the fact that most people are going to say, no, the fact that it was legal is the problem, right? So I do think there's a problem with Biden there, and if you can't see that there's a problem with Trump, that should be a warning flag for you, right? Unless you think, by the immaculate conception of politicians, Trump is 100% clean, then you've got to start looking at where is he not, and how does that compare to other wrongdoing that you perceive. Let's see. Sherry Addis says, what can Dems do if Trump keeps stonewalling? Well, they could arrest Rudy Giuliani. I saw an interesting op-ed this morning. Josh Chaffetz was the writer, I think Washington Post, but maybe New York Times, said that we're coming up on another government shutdown deadline, and Democrats could simply say, not pass a budget that includes any funding for the White House counsel's office. It's kind of like, evil genius stuff, but they can just say this money is not being used as allocated, which is to, the White House counsel, these are lawyers. They're duty bound to be officers of the court to comply with legal orders. And if they're not, then why would we be funding you? So there are a lot of mechanisms. There are a lot of buttons that Democrats can push in these circumstances. They could send the sergeant at arms to go haul witnesses before the relevant committees. And if they don't testify, then the House is allowed to, and according to this piece I read, has, as recently as the 20th century, set aside rooms where, okay, this, 234D is now our jail. And that's where we put our witnesses until they agree to testify. Leonardo Alvarez says, why doesn't Obama endorse Bernie? He's done it before in 2006. If he does, it's game over. What do you think? I don't know why he doesn't endorse Bernie. My guess is he probably doesn't think Bernie would be the best candidate and or president. My guess is he prefers someone else, but I could be wrong. I don't know. Patrick's Time says, arrest Rudy for what? I would believe that would be not complying with the subpoena to go testify or turn over documents, whatever it is. But you have to. The law is not ambiguous about this. If the House issues a subpoena, you have to comply with it. You can challenge it in court, in theory, I think, but most of the courts that haven't had sort of hacky partisan judges appointed are going to recognize that this is not a controversial thing, right? This has happened multiple times throughout U.S. history, and it's never been a problem. House issues a subpoena, you got to comply. If you don't, Sergeant at Arms can come get you. All right, you guys are all mad at Obama now. Okay, so good Lord, we've got 68 people watching now. We're not even on any one topic. I'm just jabbering here. 68 people are watching me jabber. Guys, come on. What is going on here? This is nuts. Now it just went up to 70. Now you're just messing with me, I think. Or it's the trolls. Maybe the trolls are just in such great numbers that we're getting a lot of people here. Sherry Addis claims that I am famous. Karen Ola says, I just cannot believe anyone can refuse a House subpoena. Well, you can't, right? But the question is, these are our norms, right? Our norms have been the unspoken meaning of can't. You can't do that. We say that all the time. You can't do that. Well, technically they can, right? When we say you can't do that, what we tend to mean is there are consequences for doing it. And the real norms aren't that you can't do it. The real norms, the teeth in our norms, are the consequences, right? And that's why I talk a lot about how it's the Democrats who are violating norms here. When you're a parent, you expect your kids to push against the rules, right? Enforcing the norms, teaching the norms, that's the job of a parent. And when parents let their kids run amok, sure, you might blame the kid, but the younger the kid, the more likely people are going to recognize, oh, that's the parent's fault. That's the parent's fault. If the Democrats want to claim to be the grown-ups, you got to enforce the norms. You have to enforce the norms because those are the real norms. Those are the norms on which the other norms all rest, right? Those are the axiomatic norms. Axiomatic meaning that's just the way it's going to be. If you violate the other norms, like you must comply with a House subpoena, then these axiomatic norms should kick in, which are, and you'll spend time in the pokey if you don't. Tanya Roebuck says, Tanya Roebuck, by the way, about to become my new favorite fan here. Tanya Roebuck says, don't be surprised if we want to hear what you have to say. Don't sell yourself short, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Tanya. That's very kind of you to say. Clayton Shake says, the can't do that mentality is very defeatist. Some conservatives reject Bernie's platform simply because deep down they feel that's unachievable with a corrupt government. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think a lot of the can't do that mentality comes from this prediction about how other people will act, right? We saw some polls early on in the Democratic presidential race about people making their decision about who they would vote for based on how they thought that person would do with other voters. Like, this isn't the time to do that. That's later on. And it's also, arrogance the wrong word, maybe fearful. Like, you're supposed to have your say, right? Same thing goes in the House of Representatives. You might be fearful that another member of the House is going to be mad if you vote for impeachment, but that's supposed to be their problem, right? You're responsible for your actions, not for other people's actions. So if you've got a vote in a primary, vote for what you think is the best candidate. If you have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, uphold the Constitution. Can't do that is just a cheat for this might get uncomfortable for me. Let's see. Stephanie Love says, yeah, you didn't seem to have Republican trolls the last couple times I've been on here, but maybe the fact that they found you means that your live streams and channel are growing. Clearly, we are just rocket fueling our way to success. And I've got PewDiePie on the other line right now, very concerned, very threatened, feeling very threatened, clearly. Thank you, Reller82 says you're bringing sanity to news. That's why we're watching. I appreciate that. And I will say this. I worry sometimes that my own commentary, whether it's thought out beforehand or on the fly like I'm doing right now, is sort of insufficiently confrontational, insufficiently judgmental, right? I'm reluctant, if you guys have been watching for a while, you know I'm reluctant to sort of say evil, bad, racist, corrupt, sexist. I'm reluctant to put labels on people as opposed to actions. I'm much more comfortable referring to actions that way. And that can feel accommodationist. That can feel like I'm being an apologist for people. And I'm not always sure about the best way to sort of square that and say, no, I can think certain actions are intolerable, but I don't think that achieving the best world comes about by canceling people, whatever that might mean. I do believe in the edict that we should always leave a path, however narrow, for people to come back. And by back, I don't mean you get to host the Today Show again. That is not what I mean. What I mean is you get to be a person. You go through an appropriate mea culpa period and everything. It doesn't mean you get back everything, but we need to have, I think, because or else what you do is if you put up that wall and make it a one-way wall, and you say once you go over to the enemy, and even I obviously have problems calling people the enemy. Once you go there, you're not welcome back here. You're just fortifying their ranks, right? I'm more interested in outcomes than I am in, I guess, the sort of instant exercise of justice. However right-minded that exercise might be, I'm more interested in who are the future victims going to be of that racist if we keep them forcibly in the camp of actual overt explicit racists, if that makes any sense. Let's see. Nails and Glitter says, let's label our government based on its actions. I'm not sure what that means, but I think that's probably about right. Jessica said, love today's talk. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Jessica. I did too. Let's see. All right, now I'm gonna lay off the nice things because now it's making me, I can like feel a blush coming on. So please know that I see it and I appreciate it, but I'm gonna start acting like an idiot if I read any more of them out loud. Patrick's Time says, Trump is not an establishment politician. Maybe that was true. How is that not true now? If the establishment, if the Republican establishment says he's our guy, then how is he not, right? You can certainly argue that Trump has changed what the establishment is, and I would agree with that, but I would also say it's not a quantum leap, right? Bush also was not an establishment politician, the second Bush. he was clearly he came from a different track, right? He was not an establishment Republican the way you used to have, where there used to be such a thing as a Rockefeller Republican. This is Sarah Palin, not an establishment Republican, but she was the vice presidential candidate. So the definition of establishment Republican has changed to the point where you can't. It's harder to argue that someone's not an establishment Republican anymore, right? Because that definition has been changed. You got Sarah Palin running for vice president. You've got Trump as president. You had George W. Bush, who, by the way, I should note, violated any number of norms, was considered gauche, coarse, clearly not to the same degree that Trump was, but that's the point. It's a question of degrees. Amanda K says, I reported that troll. Hopefully it will stop him. I got most of his accounts. Maybe it will. So thank you for that. And I guess I should look into, like, you know, this is the price of having some more people show up, is I got to do the work now of figuring out how do you stop those people in a more effective, efficient way than I did today. But obviously it would help if you folks, if you see someone like that who's spewing hate speech, or just, you know, flooding it with single character line returns, and disrupting the conversation, I would encourage and ask everyone to sort of pile on and just report them as quickly as we can. Let's see. Oh, I just saw a Leonardo Alvarez. So you're saying we should forgive Kanye West? LOL. I would like to be able to forgive everyone. And I do think that means that there's an allocution there, and I talked about this the other day, but I think that, let me put it this way. You know, when I was growing up, it was very common, more so than now, to refer to young criminals, especially black criminals, Latino criminals, violent criminals, but not necessarily, as animals, as thugs, dehumanizing them. And part of my concern about saying that some things are unforgivable, some people are unforgivable, is that now denial of forgiveness becomes an acceptable tactic, right? And I think it's important that we police what our acceptable tactics are, because as soon as we say lack of forgiveness is an acceptable tactic, then the argument becomes merely over who it's applied to. And that's much harder to do when you've said, well, I can use it on the people I think are worthy of it. It's very hard to say to someone else why they can't do it to the people they think are worthy of it. And the same thing occurred to me regarding all this NBA China business regarding Hong Kong, which is the left has been very happy to see corporations, big business, police private morality. In other words, we see an employee doing something heinous, hate speech, violent, hate crimes. And sometimes it's because we don't feel like we have a proper recourse in the justice system. So we've turned to corporate America and said, you got to fire that guy. They're a piece of sugar. They're a piece of crap. You got to fire that guy. Once corporate firing for morality becomes a problem, becomes acceptable, then anyone is allowed to use it, right? And we can disagree over who they should be applying it to, but you can't make the argument anymore of, no, we don't ask corporations to police morality. So now the idea that the NBA can penalize people for sticking up for pro-democracy forces, protesters in Hong Kong, well, that's a tactic we've said that corporations can use. They can police private speech. We don't have that argument anymore. So all of that is a very long-winded way, and that's what I do. If you like long-winded, you've subscribed to the right channel. That's my long-winded way of saying I'm hesitant to adopt irredeemability as a tactic. And that means we have some work to do on what it means to forgive people. Like I haven't judged Kanye West for what he's done, but if I were to be asked whether I forgive him, I would have to do the work. I would have to read up. I would have to make an argument, a cogent argument to myself about what did he do wrong, if anything, and what does forgiveness look like, and then evaluate, has he, checked those boxes. And, it just feels like an exercise that it feels a little uncomfortable even to engage in. I'm going to judge you, other person, on your sins and on your redemption journey. It doesn't feel comfortable to me. James Harris sums up the last 10 minutes of what I just said as, do you want to be right or do you want to see change? That's why you, James Harris, should probably be anchoring this. Patrick's Time says, it's no surprise establishment Republicans and Democrats are trying to destroy Trump. That's true. What is a surprise is how few establishment Republicans are trying to destroy Trump, right? How many establishment Republicans are really trying to destroy Trump, right? Even Lindsey Graham, who is clearly out of his mind with rage about the Kurds, and I'm not disagreeing with him, I'm just pointing out this is what it took, right? Never mind what he said before getting elected about physically assaulting women, sexually, violently assaulting women. All of your establishment Republicans held their nose at that and let their endorsements ride. I think maybe Romney endorsed and then pulled his endorsement. A couple of people went through that whole, their whole Passion of the Christ, the Stations of the Cross on their Trump endorsement, but they ended up holding their nose and doing it. So I'm not sure which establishment Republicans you think are working to destroy Trump. Would you say that the Senate Majority Leader, the highest ranking outside of the White House Republican there is, the definition of establishment, the Senate Majority Leader, voted for by the majority? In other words, the entire Senate Republican caucus voted this guy into office, and he's not trying to destroy Trump. So I'm not sure how much more establishment you can get than Senate Majority Leader, except for President. And that's Trump and Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. So the establishment is lockstep behind the man. Let's see. Laura Simpson says, I say we pay a sergeant at arms and utilize that jail cell. It's what it's there for. So according to what I read, there is no jail cell. They'd have to quickly empty out all the stuff in the janitor's closet and convert that into a cell, which I think would be, just the theatrical aspect of that would be fun. Joseph Murphy says, oh, this is interesting. I'm breaking my rule a little bit on the compliment here just because I'm intrigued by the after effect. Joseph Murphy says, your attraction is solid analysis. Thank you. The salacious stuff just serves to activate the amygdala. So what salacious stuff? I feel like, oh no, is that picture in the background dirty or something? So what's the salacious stuff here? Let's see what else. Patrick's Time says, Trump is destroying Bush's New World Order. Yeah, to some extent that's true. But the Republican establishment is with him on it. That was my point, that what the establishment is has changed. And we've seen, the anguish, the tearing of the hair shirts and the rending of the hair or whatever it is. We've seen the Republican Party leadership sort of, like on the wriggling on the dissection table as this was done to them. But they went along with it, Patrick. They've gone along with it, complaining, giving their anonymous quotes, but basically still in lockstep. So when the establishment goes with you, the definition of establishment changes. And so establishment Republicanism, it might change back instantly if Trump doesn't win re-election. But today, right now, that's what your Republican establishment is. Okay, so I have I don't remember who it was who got all up in my grill. And by the way, they were fine. I don't have a problem with them. I'm just being theatrical about it for comedic effect. Someone was all over me last week about not, I think it was X-Force, who never came back. I feel horrible about not going long enough on these chats. So I feel like I've done my duty on that front. So the 720 said, is there separation between church and state? I think there still is. We can talk about that some other time, I think. All right, so Nails and Glitter says, feel free to leave the live if you aren't satisfied. Now I don't know if you're talking to me or someone else. Oh, maybe you're talking to Patrick. Patrick's time said, Jimmy Dore is much wiser than this leftist. I've met Jimmy. I don't have a problem with Jimmy, but then again, I haven't watched all of his stuff, you know, religiously or secularly. So yeah, I mean, I would totally expect some people to prefer Jimmy's take on things than mine, and I'm totally fine with that. So, you know, Jimmy's got his outlets out there, and I think people should go check it out, and go check out Sam Seder at the Majority Report, which started a while ago, I think. And with that, I have gone more than an hour, so I'm having fun, but I'm also feeling guilty about the things I'm not doing for work. So I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to ask you again, if you're still watching, 55 people are watching now. What is with you guys? This is insane. I'm gonna have a big drop off tomorrow, because tomorrow I do media analysis, and who the hell wants to watch that? But if you do want to watch that, nice segue, dude. If you do want to watch that, subscribe to our channel here at TYT Investigates on YouTube, and make sure you're around tomorrow live for the conversation. We start at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time every weekday, and we're still going more than an hour or so later. And if anyone actually really wants like to do a marathon Hassan Piker length, just go till we drop, I'm game for that. I would need to schedule that, because at some point today I've got to pick up my son from school. But if anyone's interested in that, bring it up in the comments, because I'm intrigued by what that might look like and how goofy I might get after just yammering on for that long. But in the meantime, subscribe to us here, and if you think I had anything to say worthwhile way back at the beginning, I hope you'll clip that, share it, and let people know that we're doing something different from Jimmy Dore, something different from Sam Seder, different even from Cenk Uygur, and hopefully unique enough to be worth your time. I'm very touched and moved and appreciative of all the kind words, the fact that you guys are here, and I'm really glad we started doing this summer, because it's a lot of fun. Thank you. And take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.